This is Kanzenshuu, the podcast, episode 519 for the week of April 6th, 2025. Hello once again, and welcome back to Kanzenshuu, the podcast, an extension of the all-encompassing Dragon Ball fan site, Kanzenshuu. We cover anything and everything Dragon Ball in hopes of enlightening and a little bit of entertaining along the way. Great to be back with you here on a somewhat regular schedule, continuing onward throughout the year. My name is Mike. You may see me around as Vegito EX. If you're just tuning in, we are smack in the middle of, let's call it like interview season here at Kanzenshuu. Last episode in the podcast, we had Rocco from Mega 64. It was a wonderful chat. This time around on the show, we have Brandon Bovia. Brandon is, I would say, the longest letterer on the Dragon Ball Super manga English language release from Viz. Now, what is a letterer? Well, you're going to learn all about that this episode. Had a wonderful chat with Brandon. I am so excited to chat with him here on the show. As is the norm with these kinds of episodes, I say we just get right on into it. Enjoy the chat, and I will see you on the flip side to wrap things up. Here we go. Happy to welcome to the show Brandon Bovia. The folks who are listening to this right now probably know you best from lettering on the Dragon Ball Super manga. We're going to break down lettering. We're going to break down touch-up. We're going to break down Viz and roles and how that all works here. Brandon, take me back to the start, though. Tell me about your introduction to Dragon Ball as a fan.
Well, I mean, I feel like mine's pretty boring. You know, like I'm a millennial, so of course, I was a Toonami kid. So, you know, just like any other kid of that generation, you know, saw Dragon Ball Z on TV and the rest was history, basically. It was kind of, it was something I didn't realize until I had grown up, like just realizing how scattershot my experience with DBZ as a franchise was. It just kind of like, oh, I kind of got the broad strokes, you know, through, I certainly didn't watch the whole thing on TV, even if, you know, playing the video games and kind of learning, like filling in the gaps slowly over time before it felt like I had I guess, kind of a holistic view of the franchise. And then, yeah, I mean, other than that, I would say, you know, I've been a fan of Team 4-Star's work, you know, pretty much ever since they started. And then, you know, skip ahead another like decade. And then it's like, oh, I guess I'm working on the manga now.
It's funny how that all works. What I think is interesting about the earliest Toonami days is even then watching the dub still kind of mirrored watching the Japanese version because it was not all available. So to your point, it was piecemeal for a while there where it was, all right, whatever's on Toonami, whatever I can get on home video, maybe I'm downloading some clips here and there. I always tell kids today, it's not like you have now where you just press play on episode 1 on Crunchyroll. You just watch through the entire series.
Those are the whole thing. Yeah, right.
We didn't have that. So what were some of the things that you saw like out of order and tried to piece together and you're like, who even is this character? Yeah,
I guess it's more of just like, I mean, I had an awareness of like, okay, you know, for say something like Broly, for example, like, oh, he's a movie character. Sure. You know, my introduction to him was probably one of the Budokai games.
Yeah.
Before I ever saw one of the movies, and just, you know, weird kind of random details like that.
Yeah.
Things like there's some stuff that I thought was from Z that ended up being in GT, and just kind of, I can't think of any specific details at the moment, or so, you know, something that comes to mind is just like, oh, you know, Vegeta had a mustache for a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, right, that was a GT thing, you know, and much like my experience with Z, you know, my experience with GT was mostly scattershot, and I think something clicked once I learned as an adult that they skipped a bunch of it on the TV airings here, right? Like the first, basically up till Baby.
Right, yeah, it's like the first, they made up their own initial recap episode, and then it's like episode 16, 17 is when it quote unquote starts from there.
Yeah. Weirdly, the thing that always stood out to me the most with GT was Super 17. So learning that, like, oh, that was like an infinitesimally small part of the show.
Yeah,
it's like, oh,
it's like 6 episodes. It's so funny to me because I remember I was picking up fan subs but before it aired over here and be like, you're telling me I can get an entire saga in 2 VHS tapes? What are you talking about? That seems so weird.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, that doesn't. Yeah, I think I've got those VHS tapes.
All right, so growing up, Toonami Beyond, obviously, anime continues to further explode from there. We've had many many explosions over the years. Toonami was an important and informative one there. Where do you go from there? Because the next question is really like your professional background and getting into the industry, but I feel like there's got to be some connective tissue between those two moments.
Yeah. Oh man. I guess I kind of forgot a crucial part of this whole part of my journey as a Dragon Ball fan is Kai.
Sure.
I think that was probably Kai and Abridged were probably the two moments where I was like, oh, I like get Dragon Ball now. Like this isn't just like this thing that I liked a lot as a kid, but didn't really understand that there was like an order or a parlance to things. It was like, oh, there's like actually like I was following the narrative from point A to point B.
Got it. All right. So Kai is over here. That's like 2010. I feel like it starts.
Yeah, and I think I was I want to say like I was watching it in Japanese online at that point.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. I think that might have been the switch over.
So then take me forward. So then how do we get to I'm into this, I'm watching this on TV, it's coming back around again, it's a huge thing. Oh yeah, I'm totally into this. This is my scene. How do you get involved on a professional level? Like what are you studying? What are you doing? What's your work experience like? How does that transition you in there?
Yeah. So I started drawing my own comics, probably about high school. Actually, probably earlier than that, but high school was when I started taking it really seriously. And one of the things that I did that I think was like one of the smartest things that I have ever done was because I was like, oh, I want this comic, the comics I'm drawing, I want them to look as like legitimate as possible. So I would look, like I would start learning about lettering, and I would start being like, okay, how do I like get the text to look as close to, what I'm seeing in like Shonen Jump at the time, not just, Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, any other number of manga, and just sort of like, especially of that era, you had all kinds of kids my age who were trying to emulate like the art styles, just of like their favorite manga and their favorite anime. But I went just going the extra little step further of like, I'm going to learn about fonts real quick. I'm going to learn about like really kind of dive deep and understand. I may not have quite known what like a letterer was, but I understood that like this text was in Japanese at some point, and it took somebody like taking it into English and kind of gaining a greater awareness of like the choices that got made there, and really learning, I guess, kind of how to have a taste. Not only for lettering, but just like graphic design and stuff in general. So I really think that was what put me over the edge. And, I went to college for a good few years. I didn't really get better at lettering. I stopped having time for comics. But when I look at the lettering I was doing for my personal comics, probably around 2011, 2012 or so. And like you jump from that to when I started lettering manga officially, which was in 2017. It's basically like the same skill level. So I can go back to sort of the latter era of my comic drawing days and be like, I kind of knew a thing or two.
That's funny.
It really was just kind of getting a professional opportunity, which boiled down to answering a cold call from Seven Seas that they put up, put out like, oh, we're looking for letterers, out on like Twitter or whatever. And then, I took their test. With most lettering tests, which is a thing with a lot of publishers, is just like, hey, let's see where your skill level is at. They'll give you like a style guide or like a part of their style guide and be like, this is what we're looking for. And then, just I had enough understanding of, like software knowledge and, graphic design and lettering knowledge to be like, okay, I understand what they're demanding of me for the most part.
Interesting. Yeah. So they give you like, here's a guide, here's an image, go nuts. And it's
pretty much
no real guidance beyond that. Like, what am I supposed to use? Am I supposed to use Photoshop? Am I supposed to use Illustrator? Do they not really even say? They just want to see what you give back at that point?
I would say it depends.
Yeah.
I used Photoshop for the entirety of my lettering, for not just my 7Cs test, but for the first like year and a half of working with 7Cs. I was legitimately like, I sort of know how to use Adobe InDesign, which is the standard for for like dialogue and things like that, and page layout. But like I had to consciously make a transition at some point, because I was like, I'm just gonna do all my lettering in Photoshop, even though that ended up being really, really slow. But
got it. So that kind of gets into a bunch of different things here where, okay, there was just an opportunity and you went for it and you took it.
Yeah,
and you got a little bit there.
And it just snowballed after that. I'm trying to remember the timeline of things here. I think Viz was actually my second client. I think I had maybe 2 books down at Seven Seas by the time I took the Viz test. That sounds about right. Like it was really early.
Got it.
Yeah. And so I was doing, this was back when Shonen Jump was still like the digital magazine.
Right.
So this was about a year-ish before like the app launched as we know it now. And so they had this program called Jump Starts, where a new series would start in Japan, and then they would run a localization of the first like 3 chapters, and just kind of see how it hit. And so I ended up doing a bunch of those until the app launched as it is now, and we get basically everything that comes out of Japan, at least in the main magazine.
Yeah. There's a couple things we could go into there. One is you probably have like a bunch of like lost little babies along the way of just a million things you did 2 or 3 chapters.
Quite a few.
Yeah. Just never heard from again after that.
Yeah. God, I remember my first one was one called Golem Hearts. And that was it's kind of like a baby between like FMA and Gash Bell or something like that, as best as I can remember it. I did another one called Noah's Notes, which is sort of like about archaeology, I remember. And there's a couple others that I remember that were kind of gaps. And then I think I was working on Neolation, which is like the hacker one. And I was working on that by the time that the current SJ app launched. And some of those that I worked on, like those artists went back to they came back to do other series. I know the artist for Neolation has I think the artist is doing Marriage Toxin right now. And there are a couple others where I was like, oh, I worked on, that artist's last series, which is always a really fun thing to see how they grow over time.
We've almost jumped ahead into the work itself. Let me take a couple steps back to talk about the job and ask really how it all kind of works, the ins and outs. And then, of course, folks listening, we'll talk about Dragon Ball. Hold on, we're getting to it. Something I think is really important for folks to understand. Can you talk about the difference between what you do primarily as a freelance or contractor versus what full-time positions there even are?
Oh, yeah. I would say, there are very few full-time opportunities when it comes to lettering manga. Like translation and lettering in the manga industry is like probably 90, 95, 99% freelance. And so the folks working in-house tend to be the editors and the designers. And when I say designers in contrast to lettering, the folks handling like cover art, table of contents, front and back covers, spines, stuff like that. Basically all of the stuff that's like not the internal content of the manga itself. So that can depend somewhat. There are freelance design and in-house design, but particularly with how Viz works, I think most of their designers are in-house, and certainly all their editors. So
yeah, I guess where I'm going there is to some degree. It's a hustle. There's a lot of stuff that you have going on at any given time. How many series are you working on, or have you worked on at any given time? Like what's that workload? I hate to say, like, what's an average day look like for you? But that might be a valid question. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, well, I think what an average day's looked like has changed significantly over the years.
Sure.
I was doing, God, this feels almost disingenuous. I feel like I counted up all of my ongoing projects maybe something like 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. I don't really remember. I feel like at most I've had like 20 to 30 ongoing projects at any given time. Now, with the qualifier, I'm an insane person. And everything, that you're working on all have different like release cadences, right?
Sure.
I work on some stuff, like, hey, if we're caught up to the Japanese release, I'm doing a 1 volume a year. Some of that stuff, it could be 1 volume every 2 years. Maybe it's a volume, quarterly, every other month, and you stack simulpubs on top of that, or monthlies. Like it. I think at the height of my power, I was doing a lot of stuff at a lot of different timelines. So I really think it's just kind of luck of the draw, and I feel like with freelancers, like if you are working on something that is, caught up to the Japanese release, like that's probably about time to like, oh, maybe a new project will fall in your lap, or you'll have to, I think, really consider like how long this stuff takes you. And, every letterer has like their own schedule and their own capabilities in terms of time and in terms of the amount of stuff that they can take on. And I really, I think, stretch to the limits of that at times. But yeah, I would say for the most part, I don't know. There was a moment, I think last year when I was working maybe the most out of my entire career, I was doing something like 6 to 8 volumes of manga a month, which is bad. Don't do that.
I was going to say, I know nothing, but that sounds like too much.
Superhuman.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is too much. I think I could comfortably do like 4. And right now I'm doing like 2.
Yeah.
I'll probably get back to 4 at some point, but yeah. And of course, as we'll probably get into later, how long it takes to letter a volume of manga the amount of time it takes can vary pretty wildly, which I think I struggled to understand that. So I was like, oh, well, I'm doing so-and-so number of books, not really taking into account like, oh, this book takes me like 5 hours and this one takes me like 50. Mm-hmm. So turns out I don't have infinite time.
So we've talked about some of these terms and even jobs without really describing them. Well, let's go just straight back to basics here. What is a letterer? And what does that mean? Perhaps maybe these days versus the early days of localization with manga.
Yeah, I can say just like straight out, the thing that every letterer on every book will do is copy and paste the translation into the art and format the text so that, it is centered, it is appealing, there's nothing kind of like visibly wrong with it. It's kind of a hard thing to maybe communicate if you're not looking out for it and, not like visually.
So it's like design, it's QC, like it's a whole bunch of things rolled into one.
Yeah. Like. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of design and QC. And then, of course, we also have to localize things like sound effects, which can take many forms, depending on the project, depending on the publisher. We have to do things like signs. If somebody's wearing like a t-shirt in Japanese, do you replace it just like for ease of the reader, or do you just kind of like put a note down? Those are things that are also down to like publisher style guides, editor preference, letterer preference. Like there are a lot of things when it comes to lettering manga that are like technically my decisions, but sometimes not, and sometimes maybe.
Got it.
Which is why I think I start with like, we handle dialogue, like
right.
we make sure that the dialogue looks nice first and foremost. That is the thing that I do on literally everything. But how I handle things like sound effects, how I handle things like, like signs or translation notes, like that, it really, really varies. And then I think the thing that is like most mind-boggling to most people is that, here in the year of our Lord 2025, we are still largely getting flattened assets from Japanese publishers.
God bless you.
Which means, yeah. Well, flattened with a little bit of nuance, where basically anything that is like hand-drawn or handwritten by the manga artist is baked into the art. So that is the sound effects. Oftentimes, things like signs, things like t-shirts or what have you, or, like book labels, any number of that stuff. But like most of the time, we don't have to erase dialogue anymore.
At least you have that.
Yeah, at least we have that. There's sort of a kind of a rolling cutoff where like I would say any manga published after like 2010, dialogue is not an issue. But anything older than 2010, you are probably also erasing the dialogue by hand.
Jeez. Tell me about the difference between a simulpub and a collected volume release. And maybe we can use Dragon Ball Super as an example here. So we know for the simulpub, I actually like this, and I think this is interesting. For the simulpub, the sound effects are left as is in Japanese per the original drawing. And we get like little asterisks with a description of what it is or onomatopoeia, like whatever it is there. And then for the collected, I was about to say home video release, the collected print release, your DVD release of the Dragon Ball Super manga. We all have those on our shelves. The sound effects are translated or redrawn within the actual drawing itself. So like there's I don't know which direction to go in here. I mean, I guess at least for Dragon Ball, like that's just Viz House style guide. That's just what they do, right?
100%. Yeah, that is how Viz does things. And really, of course, like we for simulpubs, like that is in the interest of time first and foremost.
Sure. Yeah.
And there are probably like any number of reasons why they choose to adapt sound effects still. Like obviously people can have their opinions on that one way or the other, but it is more of a just like, well, that's just as the freelancer, I'm just like, that's what the client wants. So, that's what I'm going to do. So that choice really doesn't come down to me necessarily. I would say the difference is for most other publishers, because a lot of other publishers do simulpubs now, where it's day and date with the Japanese release.
Right.
Those, I think at other publishers, the gap tends to be smaller because they tend to do subtitled sound effects, but like they're more styled to look like the Japanese sound effects, but they're still subtitled, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah.
They're the sound effect subtitles for like Viz simulpubs are like, they're super tiny. They're just, inconspicuous off in the corner. Whereas I feel like with a lot of other publishers, even for print, you look at something like a Seven Seas or a Kodansha manga, and it's like the subtitles are bigger and usually styled to look like the Japanese sound effects.
Got it.
Which, it's another approach basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, gosh, walk us through. So you get, a 45-page Dragon Ball Super manga chapter, and we've got Toyotaro doing the art, and he's got sound effects in the background, and there's motion lines, and there's all sorts of stuff. And we just heard you get a flat picture here on the page.
I sure do.
What do you do?
I mean, it's just what it says on the tin. I go in, I erase the Japanese sound effects, I put the English sound effects in, and then I draw in the gaps where the Japanese sound effect used to be so that it looks seamless. Like, it is all hand drawing. And in the case of Dragon Ball, it's like 90% speed lines. Yeah. So it ends up, and that's sort of the funny thing about like what it takes to retouch sound effects for a manga. Because I feel like you are sort of at the mercy of the original material when it comes to like how difficult something is to do. Because I feel like Dragon Ball, because it is mostly just drawing a bunch of straight lines, like it's time consuming, but it is not like, it's not mentally straining, right? Like it's not like I have to figure out the best way, like there have been times where I've had to like redraw entire assets, right? Like, I need to redraw part of this building so it looks seamless. I need to redraw part of this car or, part of this character's face or whatever. But like with Dragon Ball, it is mostly speed line. So it's kind of one of those things where like, if you get into a good flow, it's not that bad. I mean, I would still obviously prefer, that the manga industry could move towards getting versions of files without sound effects, particularly, if I actually don't know if Super is drawn digitally or not. Obviously, if there are still manga artists that draw traditionally, and in those cases, there's nothing you can do, right?
Right.
But I can often tell when a manga is drawn digitally, and just the amounts of crazy digital effects that authors will just put in there, and just like crazy amounts of detail that, like, if you're erasing a Japanese sound effect and you have to retouch the art, like that stuff gets really time consuming and really complicated, and really like you have to use your brain. You have to kind of look at it and go like, what was this probably originally intended to be?
Yeah.
And in the case of Dragon Ball, like I don't have to do that too much. It's pretty. It's a lot. It's still a lot of work. But it was never like my hardest series or anything. But certainly one of the more time consuming ones.
Yeah. So that said, with Dragon Ball, I mean, obviously it is Toyotaro, and I don't mean that as a like a jab at Toyotaro, but he is different from Toriyama himself. We know one of the reasons that Torishima picked up Toriyama was his big block lettering, his sound effects. Like that's just baked into the DNA of Dragon Ball. So of course that carries forward to Dragon Ball Super. Whether it's Dragon Ball or something else, I don't even really know how to phrase this question. What do you think about as you're working on it? We're like, oh man, I'm a racing piece of artwork here. Is there ever any of this like, what am I doing here? Like, do I have the right to do this?
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I think, with great power comes great responsibility and all that, right? Like there's, oh man, and that I think I can start getting into stuff like philosophy when it comes to like sound effect design and stuff like that, because you are working with something that, like is kind of sacred, right? Like you're working with the original material, and, the way that these assets were placed, the sound effects, the way that they are placed and like where they're placed, where they're like how they're styled, like are they black with a white outline? Are they white with a black outline? Do they have some kind of like special effect? Can you see the art underneath the sound effects, which is something that Toyotaro did a lot more as time went on. And so, as a letterer, you're kind of having to understand all of these like micro decisions that were being made in the original art and going like, okay, how do I replicate this while maintaining intent and while maintaining readability and flow and all of these other sorts of things? And if there's something that I need to change, because, the way that sound effects are laid out in Japanese can be a lot more freeform, and sometimes like the reading order might not make sense in English. So it's like, do I divert from the original intent for the sake of the English reader, or do I make something that like is closer to maybe how it originally looked, but is maybe makes less sense or is less natural to the eye of a native English speaker? So like those are kinds of the things that I'm constantly juggling while I'm making like new English sound effects to replace the Japanese ones. And like that is also a consideration for subtitles as well, particularly not so much the Viz style, but at other publishers where you're, using fonts to make bigger subtitles match to the Japanese, it becomes things of like, how big do you make it before it starts to, overpower the art? Like, do you have enough white space to make sure that your subtitle doesn't cover up anything crucial, things like that. And those are also considerations I make while replacing as well. Try not to cover a character's face, try not to, understand like what the focal point of the panel is, and shape your sound effects around that and things like that. So it is something that like I think when done haphazardly, because you can say, for example, like maybe you don't want to retouch something, so you're gonna make the English sound effect like extra big to cover up the art, but then like if you're covering up crucial art, like one, it looks bad, and two, I feel like it starts to get away from kind of the intent or sort of like the message of the art. So like those decisions, and obviously there's a practical side to it too, right? Like we got deadlines. And sometimes things are just like impossible to recreate in a timely manner. Not so much on Dragon Ball, but I've definitely had other series where like I'll place sound effects around the parts that would be the hardest to redraw. In a way that still makes sense and still has flow, but like you do have to juggle all of these different little considerations. So I would like to think at least that like when a letterer knows what they're doing, you are I would like to think that the art is being treated with a deft hand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. You use the word juggle or juggling a couple times there. I feel like this ties into that. Can you tell me about the workflow and collaboration with a translator and an editor on a series? Like what all communication do you have either with one or both or more beyond that? Like, all right, you're working on a Dragon Ball Super manga chapter. Do you talk to Caleb? Do you talk to anyone else? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's just like the editor is the go-between for pretty much everything. Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
We don't have to talk to the translators. I'm if I'm friends with the translator on whatever project I'm working on, which does tend to happen, especially with those of us who are active on social media or in like Discords and stuff like. But it's not a formal part of the process. It really is just like everything goes through the editor.
Yeah.
And really that's kind of all it needs to be for the most part. Like. There are not a lot of instances where I need something like crucial that like I can't just like ask the editor for, or like, oh, this will be handled at some other point in the process. So like if I have a question, I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
So it's never a necessity, I would say. And I do think despite localizing manga being, kind of a team sport, like I think in a lot of ways we are kind of left to our own devices, which I do appreciate. I think especially if I don't want to say this like this has ever happened or has happened consistently or it's like a huge problem, but like if somebody came to me and like maybe they didn't have a ton of, lettering experience, and they were like, hey, this needs to be this way. And I'm like, nah, it shouldn't be this way for this or that reason, right? Like, I would much prefer to kind of go through the editor with that and talk through the editor for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And likewise, I tend to not put my thumb on the scale when it comes to translation, mostly because I'm not a fluent Japanese speaker. I'm a so intermediate. I can read manga in Japanese. I can stumble through it. And I may have my opinion on things one way or the other, but like for the most part, like I keep to myself.
Got it. I want to get to some Dragon Ball specific stuff here, but really, I guess we got to talk about how you even came to Dragon Ball Super. I mentioned baked into the DNA. Dragon Ball from its start with Viz, whether it was Trish to Jason, like there have been handoffs along the way from whether it's an editor or a translator, and I feel like there was kind of like this transition period with Dragon Ball Super. Well, for a while, we actually didn't have credits on the simulpub, and Dragon Ball Super also wasn't simulpub for a while. It was a catch-up process. We did get those credits in the collected edition, but we saw, a transition here. All of a sudden, we did see some names popping up. Caleb Cook, in particular, as taking over as translator. And then there was a letterer before you, and then transition period. I pulled up a couple dates here. The first time I saw your name on Dragon Ball Super was chapter 43. Brandon, that's a great one. You basically start in Moro, so I love this. Yes. So that was December 1st. 2018. At that point, you're credited with like touch up and additional lettering or lettering and additional touch up, something like that. And then I saw your first full you are credited for it is chapter 53. But then meanwhile, like there's the home. Again, I was going to say home video release. The collected release, volume 9 is when your name starts coming in, which is, around this material. So just like walk me through, like how did you get involved? What was the handoff? What was going on? Yeah,
I think the timing is sort of in reverse, right? Like I started on the simulpub and then on the volumes a little bit later. Mm-hmm. Well, I think timeline wise, it was about the same time, but simulpub comes out first. And so I think during the simulpub, like it was I think it was chapter 53. It was like middle of Moro. I think it was either Gohan or Piccolo versus 7-3. I think that was my first chapter.
Got it.
Honestly, I don't really know. The story of how I got involved is super boring. Like it is literally just like the editor asked me to do it and I said yes. Like it kind of really is that simple.
Yeah.
And because if we're not personally involved with, kind of like, other freelancers, like it can be hard to really clock why like staff changes, why the contractors change over time. Because I frankly have no idea.
Yeah. And I figured that. And even if you did know, maybe you'd be like, oh, we can't really talk about it. It's just, sometimes it's just, there's a change and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. Like I think as freelancers, we have what's the word I'm looking for? Like we have the leeway to kind of pick and choose, like if maybe we don't want to work on something anymore, like we can kind of say like, hey, can you hand this off to somebody else?
Sure.
Or like if you just don't have time, or maybe you're just not enjoying it, or, any number of reasons, I had to drop out on a lot of stuff, including Dragon Ball, kind of for health reasons and scheduling reasons. The train keeps rolling.
Yeah.
And that's really all there kind of is to it, is like, I got asked, I already had a working relationship with Ray, the DBS editor, because we worked on Snow White with the Red Hair together. I think that was the first thing we worked on together. And that was earlier in 2018, I think. And then he ended up, that was like only the first 3 volumes, I think. And then sort of a little bit later, I'm super not remembering the exact timeline of these things. But yeah, I mean, when you look at it as a whole, you said, I started working on Super kind of towards the end of 2018. Like that is, I feel like, not to, I don't say this to like toot my own horn, but like, like I think I am fairly well known. Like if you know what lettering manga is, you might know who I am.
Yes.
Like I feel like I'm, I guess, just one of the more visible and vocal ones.
Sure.
But that's all to say that like Dragon Ball Super happened very early into my career. That's like a year and a half, basically.
Yeah. What's so funny is you run the numbers now, like, Oh, that's actually more than half of Dragon Ball Super, which is
Yes.
especially funny because it's only 3 story arcs. It's only Moro, Granola, and Superhero that is,
Yep.
but they're so long and so many pages.
Yeah, I definitely take it as a point of pride that, once I was like, I've lettered more of Super than I haven't. I was like, oh man, I've been here for a minute.
Yeah.
That feels good. And that, like, obviously, I can talk a lot about like Dragon Ball's sort of like visual identity, they've been using the same dialogue font since the 90s, right? Like there's not much of my impact there. But I really go out of my way for like the sound effects for the volumes to be like, to try and thread the needle of like making it look like Dragon Ball lettering, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because that's where I want to go. Is something I've talked about for many, many years is in our translations archive on the site, you go read something that Toriyama wrote and said, like, there's a little bit of Jake and Julian in there because they're the translator and there's something of them that's in there. So what is Brandon in the Dragon Ball Super manga, whether that's just some kind of special formatting you like to do, or a repeated sound effect, like, oh yeah, I know exactly how I always like to do the sound effect. Like, what's your touch that you feel you've left in there?
Yeah. Oh, this is super hard to describe without like visual examples, but like I really do think that like every manga letterer does have their own style. And that does come down to like, what kind of fonts do they like to use? Or do they like to hand draw, especially if they like to hand draw their fonts, like you can tell one letterer's handwriting from another, or, how the way they stylize sound effects, how the way that they distort the characters, so that they look like appealing and that they have a nice like flow with the art. And obviously because I'm a letterer, I can see my work as distinctly my work compared to both the first 2 letterers for Super and, the run, the letterers for the original in Z, right? Like, I feel like despite my efforts to kind of be a part of a whole, like, I do have those intrinsic qualities of just how I adapt sound effects, how I guess how I do action, right? Like how I make sure that the characters are stylized in a certain way so that like when your eye reads them, it reads naturally. It reads like you're not hitting like a hard stop in the way that like, oh, suddenly this character is at like this angle in the middle of a word. And obviously, you did that just to cover up a part of the art or something like that. Like, I do think the way that I size and distort my characters has this particular look to it. And so even though like I try to quote unquote hide it, when I'm working on, because I try to use as like a diverse set of fonts as possible, since I'm not a hand letterer by any means. I'm no good at it. But like when I'm working on sound effects for manga, I might reuse some, but I try to make sure that like the whole group is as unique as possible, so that you might not know on first glance that it's like, oh, this is Brandon Bovia's lettering. Like if you're looking out for it. Maybe people have noticed, maybe they haven't. I would be really curious if somebody would know one way or the other. But like, I try to give all of my books a relatively unique look, if that makes sense. Well, obviously, like I'm still first and foremost trying to match the Japanese, but like the approach I take to match the Japanese, I think changes. And the group of like the sound effects I use, the sound effect fonts I use in Dragon Ball Super changed over the years, just like because my style and my taste changed. But like those are things that I notice. I don't know if people in particular have noticed, like, oh, Brandon started using so and so font around volume 12 or volume 13 or stuff like that.
That's funny. You mentioned you're maybe less of a hand drawer on that, but do you ever use or maybe see other folks use, like, okay, I want to keep some, like, maybe a side of this sound effect, like, as it was originally drawn. Then I'm going to build off of what was there rather than erase the entirety of it. Is there some of that that goes into it?
I've heard of letterers doing that. I've done it in special cases. There are a couple of manga where I did it a lot. I think for me that it is just like, it just kind of comes down to personal preference and just kind of what you think fits best for the context. If there is something that I think is like really special and would be really hard to approximate with a font, then like, there's really nothing wrong with just like kind of copy and pasting the Japanese and then just like rotating it and redrawing in the gaps so that it looks like English letters. Like that's absolutely a thing.
Work with what you got, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I'm just faster with fonts, which is why it tends to be my default.
Got it.
But I do like doing hand drawn flourishes. I think probably the biggest visual indicator, it took me a while to remember, for like my lettering work on Super is that like, okay, where do I start with this? Like the thing about fonts, right? And the thing about like sound effects, like with manga, is that like in Japanese, they are often hand drawn by the manga artist. If you have something that's like has like an outline, obviously the width of that outline is not going to be consistent because it's hand drawn by the artist.
Right.
Whereas if you're using a font and you're just using like black stroke in Photoshop or something, like it's going to have kind of a digital look to it because it is the same thickness around. And I think like that is, I think, acceptable, but like you can always go a little bit further, right? Just kind of depending on workload and deadlines and things like that. Like it's something that I try to avoid, but there's, with room for leeway. But on Super is where I really started to like experiment with techniques to kind of automate line thickness. So you'll often see sound effects with these really wavy, like inky outlines. And that is sort of a technique that I kind of figured out over the years and was sort of, I think, at least on Super, kind of like my signature style.
We've got a bunch of questions here in the Kanzenshuu Patreon chat that I do want to get to, but I kind of want to wrap things up on my side before we get to these folks. I think this is a two-part question. So one is Dragon Ball Super in particular, published in V-Jump, Shueisha's V-Jump magazine. It's a monthly magazine in Japan. Roughly comes out on the 21st of every month, barring a Sunday or holiday. Gets moved up a day or two there. When did you get what you're working on for it? Like, what's the timeline of working on a Dragon Ball Super manga chapter?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say hard numbers.
Sure.
I'll leave it a little vague and say like a little over a week. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit over a week from the publishing date.
Got it.
Which is plenty of time. Like I don't know what it's like for other folks. Like I think lettering a chapter of the simulpub, I think probably about like 2 hours max. Yeah. Probably closer to an hour and a half. But
so plenty of time for that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Obviously, I can't be out eating up all of that time. There's things like in-house checks and proofing and stuff like that. So that's not to say that I have 7 days to letter the manga.
Sure.
But I have plenty of time. Barring some example. I think the deadlines got a little bit tighter, kind of for obvious reasons around the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think around the time the pandemic started, I needed to get them out a little bit faster. And sometimes it can be a little worrying when like, oh, you expect your files for not just Dragon Ball, but like any simulpub. You're like, oh,
sure.
The files normally come in around this time, and then the longer that they're not in, the longer that you have to wait, and you're like, it's like a ticking time bomb. You're like, oh god. If your files are coming in, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 days later than you're used to, it's like, well,
yeah,
time to boogie. Well, all the meanwhile, you're just sort of like staring down the clock in the face. You're just like, oh no.
Sure.
But I would say mostly not a problem with Dragon Ball.
Got it. All right. Well, knowing that, obviously you got to get stuff early because you have to be ready for the time that it comes out. So that I think it's fine. That's fair. Really interesting to me, especially coming in Mora where it wasn't based on any prior content. So everything was all new along the way. Were there any moments along the Moro or Granola arcs where you're like, oh shit, this is incredible, and I got to hold on to this for like a week before anyone reads this?
Black Frieza is probably my favorite.
Yeah, it's got to be, right?
Yeah, Black Frieza was, and maybe not just Dragon Ball, but like maybe in my time working in this industry as a whole was like the most I had ever like sat on something and was like, people are going to go nuts.
I had not even considered that, but of course that's number one.
Not even just Black Frieza necessarily, but like that whole sequence of just him showing up out of nowhere and like one-tapping everybody and piecing out. Like it was... Because I do skim through the chapters in Japanese before I start lettering them, because the translation will take a minute. Yeah, so I was like, yeah, why not? And so I think Black Frieza was maybe the one time Caleb told me ahead of time, like, go read the chapter.
That's great.
It's like, you might want to read this. And I was like, I was dying. It was so good. Other than that, same arc, Ultra Ego is probably up there too.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
For that whole thing. Yeah. Sort of. I guess New Forms is kind of a cop-out answer, but for the most part, yeah, there is. You can kind of tell whenever, for better or for worse, whether or not it will be like warmly received. It's really funny to get something in your lap and go like, oh, people are going to go nuts, and sort of awaiting the, because much to my chagrin, these things leaked on Twitter, while they were,
of course,
usually like 2-3 days before the chapter dropped. And so it's funny getting that stuff even before the leaks start happening and being like, okay, all right, here we go. And of course, I'm sitting on my hands, not talking about anything while, I see everybody going like, is this real? Is this fake? I've had randos in my DMs, try to confirm things through me. Don't do that. I will not answer you.
God, unbelievable.
But it is what it is. So I enjoy it all the same.
Cool. Let's take some of these chat questions. Some of these we've answered in the course of our conversation, so that's good. AJ's got a good one here. Back in the day, a lot of typesetting was offset from the page edge, so it didn't get buried in the fold because everything was physical. The majority of stuff now is published digitally, and it seems that approach has died off. In spite of that, physical media still exists. So how does that get approached? Does that make sense? Like the gutter of the page and the alignment of everything? Yeah. How do you handle that? Do you move it around? Does someone else move it around? What's the deal with physical media?
I move it around. It's me. I'm the one. For simulpubs, it's a non-issue, right? Like it is a straight up, just don't worry about it. You ignore it. And then this is a process that I go through with not just Dragon Ball, but every sort of like Viz simulpub is like, because the templates that we use for simuls and for print are different.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something I've talked about before is like folks don't know, like the page size is actually different. There's more art on the page in the V-Jump serializations. Like you actually have a cropped manga over there in the collected edition. Yeah,
and not only that, but I don't know why this is a trend across the Japanese, publishing industry as a whole, but like going from like magazine release to tankobon, like the file assets themselves are upscaled for whatever reason. So they're like the assets that we use for the volumes are bigger. And so what this comes down to is that like copying and pasting the translation from the simul to the print graphic novel, it should be easy, but you do often have to either upscale or downscale the text. It's usually not the right size. And then when you do that, you have to basically recenter the entire book again.
Sure.
Because everything's off. And it is during that process is where I'm looking at things like, oh, this text is really close to the gutter, or like, oh, this is going to get cut off now, so I have to move it in. So those considerations are still made. It's just not a part of the simul process in particular. For the most part, you do see this in you see this in like One Piece, for example, where you do often have like weird fits because Eiichiro Oda just like puts text in the gutter just straight up.
Yeah.
So the English version does have to sort of like scooch things in a way that might not look natural at first glance, but it's, I think particularly with like, digital readers and things like that, like you still maybe can't or shouldn't have text just going like straight through the gutter. If you're like reading on a phone, for example, like you wouldn't want the text to just be like cut in half down the middle.
Right.
So those are considerations that like do have to be made sometimes, but like, yeah, if you're not One Piece, it's usually not an issue. most artists know better, I think.
Got it. Metamos here. Are there any sort of style guidelines from the rights holders and or Viz? I mean, we talked about Viz where their house style is we redraw sound effects. So like that's at least the baseline for that. Is it more that the editor's going to work with any Japanese contact, or is there rarely any Japanese contact? Have you ever had anything come back and be like, actually Toyotaro would like you to do this?
I think this happens way above my head, so I've only really heard like kind of bits and pieces of it. It seems very complicated. I think I'll want to touch on at this moment, and I think you can kind of see it sometimes because there will be things that say, I remember one thing I was actually really shocked by. Was the spelling of Bardock?
Yeah,
we spelled it the way that it was in the Z manga, like because it was spelled like Burdock initially.
Yeah.
And then that is how I lettered it. And then when I saw that the chapter went live, I was like, oh, it's Bardock now. I was like, oh, cool, great. So there are aspects where it seems like what we have to match in terms of like the old Viz translation versus like keeping consistent with, other versions of Dragon Ball. Frankly, it seems like a bit of a mess.
It does. I was going to say everything from Bardock to, because you do have that legacy, Croft, of going all the way back to 1998 with Dragon Ball's manga. And there have been times we know Shueisha and Toei have stepped in and been like, no, actually, you have to spell the name this way.
Yep.
I think Funimation got to it first, but the clown god of destruction, his name's a pun on Vermouth, and was I'm going to say properly adapted as Vermood, initially even announced by Funimation, and then all of a sudden everyone started spelling it Belmod. Like that's a very much a Seru Talankusu spelling, and yet it seems to be mandated from the top, and it. Yeah. Perhaps someone got a call and said, change it to Bardock, please.
Yeah. How, why, and when? Again, I have almost no involvement in.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak on those terms, but like even as somebody involved in the localization, but like from the outside looking in, you can kind of see things. You're like, there's something happening here. So like, I think what would be best for me to say is that like we're all doing our best.
Right.
Maybe because of or in spite of the circumstances, and like not just on Dragon Ball, but like really, localizing any manga. Like sometimes you just get word up from on high and your hands are tied, and you're like, all right, that's it. So not much you can do about that.
Right. Nerdy Norwegian, this is a complicated question. I'm not sure if maybe we've addressed it along the way. What's the biggest effect, change, suggestion you've made to the product?
Oh, I don't know if there's any.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can think of any that are like, this is I don't think there's ever been a situation where like I need to change something major so that it reads properly in English or whatever. Like, I'm trying to think. Like, I think for the most part, like, I have matched the, like, in terms of, like, the things that are within my control, like the sound effects. It's never really come up, well, I don't say this just to, like, flex, but I think for the most part, like, I haven't come across something that I couldn't recreate with enough time.
Yeah.
Or never came across something that, like, is just so impossible that it needs to be, like, changed outright. So I think in terms of just like pure formatting,
Well, okay, let's do this then. As Nerdy Norwegian follows up, what are some of the biggest challenges? Like, has there ever been a spread where you're like, oh man, this one actually is going to take me a few hours?
Yes. I think pretty much anything that is like, that has transparency is like the hardest thing that we got.
Sure.
And that is something that I alluded to earlier. Toyotaro started doing a lot more of that as the manga went on. And so I'm trying to rack my brain around exactly when it was. I think there was a big transparent effect during the I think it was during the finale of Moro. And I want to say it was maybe like
take it off the shelf, see if I can find it.
Yeah, like Goku going Ultra Instinct, or I think it might have just straight up been like the final attack.
So this is like a big 2-page spread. Oh no, the camera's up here. A big 2-page spread of Goku and Moro going against each other. And so some of the sound effect is only going over Moro, which is, I guess, is helpful. But then like you got to adapt that. And then the lines are a little blurry to show like the attack and the speed and everything. I don't have a question. I just want to say I'm sorry. It's going to be a nightmare.
Nah, I'm at this point, at that point I was, several volumes deep. So like, I feel like other than the transparencies and just, I feel like I've been saying transparencies just so for people listening, right? Like say that you have like a transparent Japanese sound effect. So you have the outline, but inside the sound effect, you can see the art under it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the art under it has like a screen door effect, basically, where so it's like it's lighter inside the sound effect than outside of it, which basically means that like it's all, I can't use any of that. So what I ended up doing is basically like having to like isolate a chunk of it and draw over it, because the parts that are transparent in the Japanese sound effect are not going to be the same parts that are transparent in English.
Yeah.
So like I basically had to do all of that from scratch. There were parts where I'm just like filtering through.
This might be what you were thinking of. This is another 2-page spread.
That's the one. That's the one.
All right,
yeah.
I'll try to remember. So it's giant Goku face spirit, and the sound effects are just like transparent, just giant black outlines, but the art is underneath. The speed lines are underneath. Oh man.
Yeah, I think there is. I might have to dig this out. There's. I feel like I made a process GIF of this and posted it on Twitter.
That'd be cool. Sure.
Like a bajillion years ago. I might have that GIF laying around somewhere. But yeah, once that volume came out, I was like, I need to go back and explain to people just how much of a complicated nightmare scenario it was. Because
believe it.
It really took kind of like I had to throw the book at it. I had to like every single like bag of tricks I had, a lot of trial and error, lots of like, okay, let's see what works, what doesn't, how do I get this? Like it was a lot. Looking back on it, a lot of fun. I remember I haven't seen my version of it in a little bit, but I remember being pretty happy with it. So
nice.
And sometimes I feel like you don't quite know how something is going to look until you see it in print, and then you're just like, I did a good job.
Good. I've taken about an hour of your time. We do have a couple last things here. Let's see what we can cruise through. Sylvie asked, do they do the sound effects? Well, yes, as we discussed, you do the sound effects. Curious about the thought process behind those. I think really what the question here is, so say you get some kind of sound effect or an onomatopoeia, do you always adapt it the exact same way? And maybe even does the translator tell you what it's conveying supposed to be? And then how do you go from there with it?
I would say like, as for what the actual sound effect is, like the translation of the sound effect is up to Caleb.
Yeah.
And he goes a little obsessive sometimes. Actually, he'll go back to the original Z translation and see like, oh, what is this like? I don't remember exactly which scene, but like whenever Piccolo uses like the Makanko Sapo, like he went back and went like, this is what the sound effect was here. So like, I'm going to use the same sound effect here.
What's great about that is because Toyotaro would do the same thing because he's looking back to the original manga and seeing what sound effect did Toriyama use here. So let's make sure we're all consistent.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wouldn't say like, I wouldn't just like copy and paste that from like the Viz DB release, but like I would kind of keep that in mind. And I would sort of like, okay, here's kind of what he's going for. Yeah. And sort of, again, that thing about juggling where it's like juggling sort of like my personal style and my personal sort of like ideals when it comes to localizing a sound effect versus like, here's what was done before. And so like, I feel like my approach to Dragon Ball is like a jumble of everything is, keeping it close to the Japanese, keeping it close to both the previous two super letterers and, the lettering for Z, and just keeping all that in mind. So it is kind of a lot to juggle. Again, I feel like you can kind of tell if you're looking for, you can see the part of Super that is lettered by Brandon Bovia, I feel like is the part of Super lettered by Brandon Bovia. I feel like despite my best efforts, you could probably tell the difference if you're looking for it. But
well, I think I have one last question for you then, and that's spending so much time with Toyotaro, in particular in this era where it's his, it's manga original content. Is there something you feel you learned about him, whether that's as an artist or maybe even his thought process behind things as you work with his art? Like, who is Toyotaro to you?
Yeah, it's been really fun for me. Like, of course, but I feel like by the time I started working on the manga, he had already come a long way from the start.
Sure, yeah.
But seeing him really, really come into his own during Moro, during Granola, and even during the superhero arc and stuff, like it is, I felt kind of like I was growing alongside him. Yeah. If that made sense. Like, just kind of being, obviously the circumstances are completely different, but, kind of being thrust into something in the same way of like, well, this is your life now. Here you are. And you have a lot of expectations to live up to. Like, obviously I've never talked to the guy, but it is something that I really was able to relate to. And, I love Dragon Ball and, there's something about working on something, that probably of all of my projects has, just de facto the most amount of eyeballs on it. Like it does, I think, change the way you perceive your own work in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So I would like to think, the benefit of not a lot of folks really talking about lettering or knowing that much about lettering, because, our job is to be kind of the invisible hand, right? Our job is to not stand out. So if people aren't thinking about the lettering, that means they're thinking about the manga content, which is what we want. I would like to think even in sort of that invisible way, I hope that, my work was able to live up to the standards of the readers and to the original art.
Yeah. Love that. Maybe this isn't a Dragon Ball question. This is just a for you kind of thing. Is there anything that you feel people just don't know about that you wish they knew about, or you wish someone would ask you about your job or what you do that you don't get to talk a lot about, but you think is really important or you love?
I feel like sound effects are my love and passion, and getting to talk about it kind of in depth, sort of about my philosophy is kind of the thing that I don't really get to talk about. And I would say like isn't really present in a whole lot of my work as a whole. Like I guess when you look at the amount of manga I've worked on, there's not a lot where they're action series where I am tasked with like the entire look of the English version. Kaiju number 8 is probably the only other big one that I'm known for. That's really like, this is like the Brandon Bovia style of sound effects and of localizing manga. So I don't know. I appreciated this opportunity to just like these are the things I'm thinking about when I'm dozens of hours into a manga, localizing a volume, and I'm like, these are here are the like 5 dozen micro decisions I'm making on every single sound effect on every single page. So like you get stuck in your head a lot about a lot of things that like 5 people are going to notice.
I love that. Well, I hope we can bring a little more appreciation to the craft and to the work. Brandon, what are you working on now? What's going on? What's important? Where can people find you, chat with you if you want them to chat with you? It sounds like don't ask weird questions, people. Come on, don't be weird.
Yeah, nah. I think most people, and that's why I really do like being kind of relatively visible as somebody who localizes manga professionally. Like I think I'm in this right spot where like I think if you're a translator on social media, like you just have like a big red target on your back, right? Like it's horrible. Intimately familiar with that, being a coworker with Caleb. Mm-hmm. As a letterer, people don't know what I do. People aren't, they're not like, oh, how dare you die or whatever. Like, like it's chill. And I appreciate that. And as long as people are still chill and still maybe don't understand entirely what I do, I'll continue to be visible.
I'm sorry.
Hey, I bring this light to myself. So,
good.
As long as people are chill, I don't mind answering any number of questions and just, especially these days, like, I don't know what capacity I'll be working on Dragon Ball in the future. I didn't work on the new one shot. I think things are kind of in flux right now.
Yeah.
So it's weird to say like I'm not working on Dragon Ball anymore. So doors open. But I guess even if I were, like a door is open either way. I'll let you know if I can't answer something. Like I'll be real with you.
Yeah. I want to be clear with the audience. I'm not going to ask Brandon what the future of Dragon Ball Super manga is if he knows one way or the other. As far as we know, like I've been telling people on the podcast forever, every issue of V-Jump just keeps saying Dragon Ball Super will be on hiatus next issue. We'll find out when we find out, if we find out. So
exactly. Yeah. And I don't know. I'm not feigning ignorance. Genuinely do not know.
All right, there we go. Yeah, Brandon, thank you so much. I had a wonderful time chatting with you. Again, I'm sorry it took so long, but I hope it was worth it in the end. I had a great time. I learned a lot here.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I guess to sort of transition into the self plugs, right? Like I co-host a One Piece podcast with my friend Derek Bittner. So I'm used to this whole podcasting thing. This is shorter than our average episodes by a little bit. So like, yeah, I'd love to talk about nerdy stuff like Dragon Ball and lettering manga. Like this is my bread and butter.
Excellent. So. All right. Well, where can folks listen to that show?
Oh yeah. Right. Our One Piece podcast is called One Piece at a Time, which is a great, cute little name. Mm-hmm. We've been reading the manga in sets of 5 chapters for the past 3 years. So we're in like the 740s, I think. So we've made a decent ways into it. And I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky under my real name, Brandon Bovia. You know, come find me, come talk to me about lettering or whatever. My big project right now is, this will sound silly to most people, but I'm a huge fan of Beyblade. So I've been working on Beyblade X for the past about year, basically.
I've been seeing those posts. It seems like you're just having a blast with it. So I love that.
Yes. I was collecting the toys before I had even gotten the offer to work on the manga. So it was just kind of a real dream come true. And that's sort of I guess, you know, is a funny little way to end off here, is like, man, I got a lot of dream projects. I never thought I would have been working on like Beyblade or Dragon Ball when I was like 7 years old, but
right.
Here I am.
It's so cool. It's great. Well, one more time, Brandon, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks. Take care, man.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Once again, thank you to Brandon for chatting with me here on the show. Loved having him. I hope you learned something. I certainly did myself. Here we are in April. Folks probably tuning in on April 1st to the site looking for something this year. I'm sorry. Just not the year for that kind of thing. Combination of, I don't know, gestures broadly towards the state of the world. Why didn't seem appropriate, but also we have just been a little too busy to pull something off like that. It was brought to my attention, however, that the April 2004 Kanzenshuu EX April Fool's Dragon Ball AF joke 21 years ago. The photo of me eating my boxers is old enough to drink now. So that's certainly something, huh? Otherwise, let's see what's going on. It's an interesting time for Dragon Ball. We are post Daima right now. We are waiting for various DLC to hit in video games, whether that's Sparking or Kakarot or the like. A variety of books have recently come out in Japan. Nothing to really write home about. At the beginning of February, we had the first guidebook for the Dragon Ball card game. Was this the Fusion World version, expansion, redo of that? First complete card collection. So that guidebook's out there. We had the first guidebook for Dragon Ball Super Divers. This is taking the place of the mostly annualized Heroes guidebooks that we had been getting. As we're chatting today, Dragon Ball Super Manga Volume 24 just hit in Japan. So that concludes the superhero arc, and it has the final one-shot bonus chapter from Toyotaro in there. And that leaves us in a state of unknown right now for the Super manga. Everything that's out is out. The back of the most recent V-Jump issue continues to say Dragon Ball Super manga will be on hiatus next issue. We'll see what that means in the future. Latest issue of Psycho Jump is out. So that Divers manga and Dragon Ball SD continues there. That's all that's being serialized right now, I think. So yeah, hashtag content is in a holding pattern right now. It's good for us, gives us a chance to do things. I always like to note this. If you want to spy on some of the public behind the scenes work that Heath and I do, there's a little edit log in the bottom right of the main website. You can see what pages we've been working on, editing, sprucing up. That doesn't show you unpublished private upcoming pages. So it's not really a holistic view into what we have going on, but it is a peek at bare minimum there. I recently wrapped up, I don't want to say wrapped up because there's a gaping hole in the middle there. But I did the episode guide pages for the Meteor Mission portion of the Heroes promotional anime. Yeah. Did I mention that last time on the show? So I've been wrapping up chapter titles and things for the corresponding manga chapters as well. I'm really reading through that for the first time. I think I flipped through them as Psycho Jump was coming out and then the collected volumes. I didn't really look at it in depth. Sure is interesting stuff in that portion of that series. With that all said, www.kanzenshuu.com. That is kanzenshuu.com, the main website. There is a website too. In terms of podcast stuff, I have at least one more podcast episode already recorded and in the bag for the future. But that one looks like it's being slightly delayed due to a corresponding upcoming release. If you know, you know. Look forward to that one. That was another amazing chat for corresponding to an official release. So stay tuned for that. So I got to figure out what's coming up next episode. I got like 3 things that can be a possible release for next time. So I'm going to work on that this weekend, figure out logistics for that. Otherwise, in the meantime, the main website, kanzenshuu.com, patreon.com/kanzenshuu. If you like what you see and what you hear. Help us keep the lights on every month. And for $5 a month, if you like what you see and you hear, come hang out with us on Discord and chat with us about Nintendo and tariffs. Thank you, everyone. That's it from me. I have been Mike Vegito EX here at Kanzenshuu. I will see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.